Welcome to the Deep Dive. Ready to go straight into a courtroom drama today?
Always. Let's do it.
We're looking at sentencing remarks, a murder trial, the whole thing. And let me tell you, this one is going to surprise you.
It really makes you think about, the justice system and how sometimes things aren't as simple as they appear.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So picture this. We're in Cardiff Crown Court, dated September 26th, 2024. Big day for three people. Kieran Carter, Chad Joy, and Amy Jones. They're all standing before the judge, about to hear their sentences in connection with the death of Daniel Rae.
Yeah, and this is where it gets interesting because we're not talking about just one crime, right? The judge had to sift through this whole chain of events, figure out what each person did, why they did it, and then try to make sense of it all.
So less of a whodunit, more of a, like you said, what did they do and why did they do it?
Exactly. But before we get into all of that, we need to understand who Daniel Rae was.
Right, because he's not just a name on a page. He was a son, a father, actually.
Mhm.
He had 4 young children. And when you hear the family in court, the things they said about him, the grief, the loss, it's a powerful reminder of the human cost in all of this.
Yeah, it's easy to lose sight of that when we're focused on the legal details, but those personal stories, those are impossible to ignore.
They are. And the judge actually addressed that head on. He said, no matter what sentence he handed down, the courts, the law, it can't ever really repair the damage that's been done.
It can't bring him back.
Exactly. So let's talk about Kieran Carter. He's the one convicted of actually killing Daniel Rae. But here's where it takes a turn. Carter wasn't a stranger to the victim. They knew each other. In fact, Carter was Daniel Rae's drug dealer. He was supplying him with cannabis and cocaine. So was this a drug deal gone wrong, or was there something more to it? The judge's remarks suggest it might not be that straightforward.
Well, yeah, because this is where it gets really interesting. It seems Daniel Rae might have been afraid that night. Like, he was expecting trouble. He was covering his face from the CCTV cameras and acting really suspicious. So the big question is why? Why would he do that if he wasn't worried about something?
That's a huge red flag. Was he afraid of Carter specifically, or was there something else going on that we don't know about? Was he involved in something else?
Yeah.
It makes you think, what else is going on here?
That is the question, isn't it? It hangs over the whole case.
So let's rewind to that night. What do we know about what actually happened in that room?
Witnesses said there was a fight, shouting. Someone was yelling about drugs, demanding them. They had a London accent, not Carter's. And get this. Carter had a serious hand injury. And it was from the same knife that killed Daniel. Now, that's not something you'd expect if this was a completely unprovoked attack.
Hold on, you're saying the murder weapon injured the murderer.
Yeah.
That changes things.
It does. And the judge picked up on that. The remarks hint that it might have been Daniel Rae who pulled out the knife first. Maybe he injured Carter during the struggle and then...
So we're not looking at a cold-blooded killer who went there intending to send a life. It sounds more like a pressure cooker situation that boiled over, with both men making choices that had devastating consequences.
Exactly. And the judge seems to agree, pointing to the possibility that this wasn't a premeditated attack by Carter, but a drug deal gone wrong, a fight that spiraled out of control with tragic results. It really makes you think about how quickly things can change in those high-stakes moments. One minute you're in a heated argument, the next, well, someone's dead.
It's a stark reminder that even seemingly small choices to pull a knife, to escalate a fight, to get involved in the drug trade in the first place can have enormous and sometimes irreversible consequences. So, given all of this, how does the judge even begin to determine a fair sentence for someone like Carter?
Well, in this case, Carter received the mandatory life sentence for murder. But here's the thing. That doesn't mean he'll be behind bars forever. The judge also had to set a minimum term that Carter must serve before he can even be considered for parole. And this is where it gets really nuanced. The judge has to carefully weigh what are known as aggravating and mitigating factors.
Okay, unpack that a bit for us. What do those legal terms actually mean in practice?
Sure. Aggravating factors are things that might make the crime more serious, like did the murder involve premeditation? Did the offender bring the weapon to the scene? Did they try to hide evidence or flee afterwards? On the flip side, mitigating factors are things that might lessen the severity, like the offender's age, their mental state, or whether they acted under duress. It's all part of this complex calculation that judges have to make.
So in Carter's case, the fact that he was injured with the murder weapon before he stabbed Daniel Rae, that would be a mitigating factor, right? Suggesting he may not have gone there intending to kill.
Exactly. That detail significantly changes the narrative. And in the end, taking everything into account, the judge sentenced Carter to a minimum of 16 years and 89 days, plus additional time for the drug dealing charges.
16 years. It's a substantial chunk of a person's life, no doubt. But I imagine there are people out there who hear that and think, is that really enough? A man is dead. What do you say to those who feel the sentence isn't harsh enough to fit the crime?
You're right. There's no sentence that can truly make up for the loss of a life. And it's understandable that people would want to see a harsh punishment, especially when grieving a loved one. But we have to remember that the justice system isn't about revenge. It's about accountability, about consequences for actions, but also about the possibility of rehabilitation.
That's an important distinction. It's not just about locking someone up and throwing away the key.
Right. It's about recognizing the complexity of these situations and acknowledging that people, even those who have committed terrible crimes, have the potential for change.
Speaking of complexities, let's move on to the other two individuals caught up in this case. Chad Joy and Amy Jones. They weren't directly involved in the fight that killed Daniel Rae, right? Their charges stem from what they did afterwards.
That's right. Chad was convicted of helping Carter search for something, most likely the murder weapon, although he wasn't successful. And Amy, she treated Carter's hand injury and then helped him get out of Cardiff. So they weren't there for the murder itself, but their actions after the fact were still deemed criminal.
So even though they weren't the ones wielding the knife, their involvement after the fact still carries serious weight in the eyes of the law. What specific charges were brought against them?
They were both convicted of obstructing justice, which, let me tell you, is a very serious offense. It strikes at the very heart of the judicial process. By interfering with an investigation, they potentially jeopardize the entire case. However, and this is important, the judge in this case took a nuanced approach. He didn't just throw the book at them based on the charge alone. He took into account their level of involvement, the actual impact of their actions, and their own personal circumstances.
So instead of immediate prison time, they were given a chance to make things right, to turn things around.
Yeah, exactly. It's called a suspended sentence. They're both under strict conditions, though, right? They have to do unpaid work, got to get some help with their drug use, and basically stay out of trouble. It's a gamble. The judge is giving them a chance, saying, okay, prove you can do better.
It really makes you think, what if they'd never gotten involved in that world, The drugs, the violence, would things have played out so differently?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But it does highlight just how destructive that lifestyle can be. Drugs and violence, it's a recipe for tragedy every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we came into this deep dive thinking, okay, murder case. But it's been anything but straightforward, hasn't it? We've got this web of relationships, these bad choices that spun out of control. And in the middle of it all, a man lost his life.
And we can't forget about the family he left behind.
Right, exactly. 4 kids without a father now. And the judge, had the tough job of trying to make sense of it all, looking at each person's role, trying to find some kind of justice.
It really leaves us with a lot to think about. The impact of drugs, the ripple effects of that one night, and these big questions about the justice system itself, can it ever really be fair? Can it actually prevent these things from happening again?
It makes you wonder, was this sentence for Carter enough? 16 years? I mean, a man is dead. But then again, like you said, could any of this have been prevented if just one person had acted differently?
It's easy to get caught up in the what ifs, but the important thing is that we keep asking these questions, right? You have to look at the choices people make, the impact those choices have, and keep working towards a world where these kinds of tragedies don't happen in the first place.
And that's where we leave this deep dive. A lot to process, a lot to think about. And remember, this is just one story, one courtroom, one night. There are countless others out there. So keep asking the tough questions, keep the conversation going, and let's all do our part to create a safer world for everyone.